So here we're going to cover one of my favorite finds I had on Amazon, I guess, or whatever, for fence fixing, for not having to cut this fence where it's really loose and resplice it. These are called Jake's fence tighteners, I believe. This little tool you buy, and then these little hooks. And you'll see this hook's going to go around this fence, like so. And then I'm going to twist the hook around, and it'll just stay in the fence. It'll catch on itself again, and that's how we're going to stretch this thing out. So there we go. We got a wire stretched up without cutting it. That wasn't my most graceful performance, but I think you get the point. These things hang on to the fence really well. There's another one just down the line where we stretched the top wire earlier last year. I see it's still in the fence. So, Jake's wire tighteners. So here we're going to cover a couple things. We've got our Aberdeen breed of cattle, so that's a full-grown Aberdeen Angus cross cow there. There's also some heifers in here. Like we talked at the beginning, those will only get to about 1,100 pound frame size, which for us is about perfect. And I think you're going to see a big shift in the cattle industry towards smaller framed animals. Our neighbors call these the mini cows or whatever. Well, they're actually about back to where cows were when we started, maybe even slightly bigger. But not the ridiculous frame size of these 1,600 pound animals. And that's also going to allow us to have steers that are going to finish out at lower weights, right? So like 1,000 to 1,100 pound steer. That'll hang a lot more efficiently as far as cut up, but then also we don't get the giant steaks or the huge amount of meat for people that want to buy a side of beef. The other thing we're going to discuss here is our switch from Ivamec to Sidectin. The reason for that is the dung beetles. And so dung beetles are so important for breaking this manure down that actually without dung beetles active, you're just going to have manure patties that last for years and years in your rangeland. The dung beetles are there to cycle the manure, turn it back into fertilizer that the grass can use. Without that, in Australia, when they imported cattle over there for the first time, they actually didn't have resident dung beetles. Because of that, all they had were just stagnant manure patties all over the grass, and it actually was becoming a crisis for the grassland because it wasn't breaking down. If any of you guys have manure patties that last for years, you're probably using Ivamec or Dectomax. Switching to Sidectin certainly is more money, but it's not detrimental to the manure dung beetles, basically. So I'm going to try and find you guys a patty here quick so I can show you some holes. So we got a couple things going on here. There are some worms in here. Some of those are dung beetle larvae, and then we also have a dung beetle here eating on this manure patty. So as you'll see later on, if we find some more mature patties, there'll be holes all over in the top, and eventually that whole patty will be broke down. But you want, the more life you can find in your manure, the better. If we're kind of running where you pull up manure patties and you're not finding holes and not finding beetles, then you've got a cycling problem. And so you might want to switch your pour on, basically. The other thing is, as far as stock water goes, you can see out here, this is actually on a pipeline system. Some of our stuff we have to haul water to. Most of it's pipelined, and these cattle can access both sides of the tank. They're just starting to move into this crop residue that we're going to graze. So this is actually our neighbor's pasture. We lease this out farther away from our farm, but he has kochia oftentimes in this field over here because it's just a difficult area to farm. It actually does us some good to get the cattle in there. The kochia is really high protein this time of year. Really good gain for the cattle, and they're also helping clean up that field at the same time that we're actually benefiting from the gain on the cattle. So you'll see there's a mix of grass, kochia, and actually canola in this field, which canolas are a pretty high energy source too for the cattle end of it. So standing canola. As far as crop residue, since we're supposed to be talking about grazing cash crops, some kochia mixed in there, and then there's also native grass around the outside. So this is one way that we use a cash crop. The other obviously would just be to seed a cash crop just straight to graze. So here's a Moderator bull. You can see it's hard to tell probably comparing, but a moderately sized cattle or whatever instead of gigantic. There is one cow in there left from our old cow herd, which you can see in the back, and you can see the difference in the frame size between the 1,400 to 1,600 pound cows and the Moderators, which are in the foreground here. You can also see the size of the calves on these Moderator cows are really pretty impressive for April grazed cattle anyways.